I didn't know my life was about to split cleanly in two because of a phone call at 1:47 a.m. A stranger's voice telling me, "Ma'am, we found your employee inside the office building. She's in your office." 6 months after my father died in the same chair I now sat in, I was still measuring time by emergencies. Payroll, roof leaks, supplier negotiations, clients threatening to leave. Grief had become background noise until that night when it turned into a siren. I threw on a hoodie with my hair still damp from a shower I hadn't even finished enjoying. The drive was a blur of red lights and cold breath. My hands shook on the steering wheel like they didn't belong to me. I kept telling myself there was an explanation, a stupid one, a harmless one, because the person they'd caught wasn't a random thief. It was Cassidy, my father's sister, the woman our family had treated like a cautionary tale for more than a decade, the woman who'd gone to jail for assault, who'd lost custody of her kids, who'd spent years blaming everyone but herself. The woman I had hired anyway. When I arrived, the security guard had her sitting in the lobby under fluorescent lights that made her skin look gray. Her mascara had bled down her cheeks like ink and rain. She looked at me the way desperate people do, like I was both the problem and the solution. "I just forgot my phone," she sobbed. But the guard didn't look uncertain. He looked tired. "We've got footage," he said. And then I watched it. Cassidy letting herself in with the key I gave her. Cassidy walking straight to my office like she owned it. Cassidy opening drawers, pulling files, unlocking a cabinet she had no business unlocking. Then, one by one, she lifted papers that could ruin us. Supplier contracts, pricing schedules, client lists, our trade secrets. And I saw the glow of her phone screen as she photographed every page like she was taking vacation pictures. Behind me, my brother's voice went ice cold. "Call the police." My mouth opened, but nothing came out. Because somewhere between the funeral and the sleepless months that followed, I had convinced myself being kind would make me safe. I was wrong, and I was about to learn just how expensive that mistake could be. Before Cassidy, before lawsuits and security cameras and that hollow, fluorescent-lit lobby at 2 a.m., there was my father. He died on a Tuesday afternoon, heart attack, sudden, brutal in its simplicity, right inside his office. One moment he was there, the next we were standing in a funeral home choosing flowers like that could somehow translate 35 years of sweat into something that made sense. He was 62, the kind of man who never talked about legacy, but built one anyway. The funeral had over 300 people. Half the town showed up because my dad didn't just run a construction supply company. He held up a whole ecosystem with it. Contractors, warehouse crews, small builders trying to keep a business alive. He was the person they called. When their trucks broke down, when their materials didn't arrive on time, when they were one bad week away from collapse. And he knew them. Not employees in a spreadsheet. People, names, kids' names. Who needed extra hours? Who needed a quiet raise? Who was trying to buy a first house? After he died, the company didn't pause for grief. It came down on us like a wave. My brother Jasper is 31, older than me by 3 years. Calm, direct, a spreadsheet brain with a spine of steel. We both have business degrees. We both worked summers at the company since we were 16. Inventory systems, contractor accounts, warehouse crew scheduling, supplier calls that always came in at the worst times. Dad didn't hand us anything. He trained us like he was preparing soldiers for a war he didn't want us to fight, but knew we might have to. My sister Kira is 25. She runs a graphic design firm downtown and wanted nothing to do with construction supplies. She said it early, said it clearly, and no one argued. She loved Dad in her own way, but she didn't want his world. When he died, Jasper and I took over a company with 47 employees and margins, so tight they could slice skin. We supply everything a crew needs within a 60-mile radius. Lumber, concrete, fixtures, tools. It's not glamorous, and people assume it's simple. It isn't. One bad quarter and payroll becomes a nightmare you can't wake up from. For the first 3 months after the funeral, Jasper and I barely breathed. We renegotiated supplier contracts. 2 major contractor accounts threatened to switch to our biggest competitor. Equipment failures stacked like dominoes. The warehouse roof needed repairs, expensive repairs, while winter slowed everything down. We worked 70-hour weeks, ate dinner at our desks. The building smelled like dust and coffee and stress. At home, my life was quieter, but heavier. My husband, Murphy, 27, stopped complaining about my hours after the second month, not because she liked them, because she saw the grief under the exhaustion and decided, silently, to carry what she could. She started leaving dinner in the fridge with reheating instructions written in neat marker. Our daughter Sky, 4, asked me one night why Mommy only comes home when it's dark. I told her I was fixing something broken. She tilted her head, serious like kids are when they're trying to understand adult pain. What's broken? I swallowed. Grandpa's work. She thought about that. Will Grandpa come back and fix it himself? I changed the subject so fast it felt like a betrayal. And somewhere in the middle of that chaos, when I was tired enough to mistake guilt for compassion, Cassidy came back into our lives. Cassidy is my father's sister, 48, persona non grata in our family for 11 years. The story everyone knew was simple. She had an affair with a married man. The man's wife was pregnant. Cassidy showed up at their house screaming at midnight, broke a window, shoved the wife when she tried to close the door. Police, arrest, jail, 8 months. Custody lost. Bridges burned. The deeper truth was even uglier. Cassidy never took responsibility. She just collected grievances like proof she was owed something. 3 weeks after my father's funeral, she messaged me on Facebook. I want to pay my respects privately, she wrote. I still cared about him. I stared at the message for 4 days. Jasper said, ignore it forever. My mother said quietly, it's your choice. Just don't expect her to behave like a normal person. I should have listened, but I was tired, grieving, trying to be the kind of person my father would be proud of. And I told myself, dangerously, that one lunch couldn't hurt. The diner was one of those places that never fully commits to any decade. Vinyl booths cracked from age, laminated menus sticky at the corners, coffee that tastes burned no matter who pours it. I picked it on purpose. Neutral ground, public, easy to leave. Cassidy showed up 20 minutes late. That alone should have told me everything. She slid into the booth across from me, like gravity had finally given up on holding her upright. Her hair was badly dyed, too dark at the roots, brassy at the ends. Stress had carved lines around her mouth that no amount of concealer could hide. She ordered coffee, wrapped both hands around the mug, and didn't take a single sip. For the first 10 minutes, she talked without breathing. About how hard the last decade had been, about how unfair the system was, about how jail changes you. She said she'd been sober for 2 years, said she worked part-time at a gas station, said the apartment she lived in was falling apart, mold on the walls, heat that cut out randomly, neighbors who screamed at night. Then she brought up her kids. Her voice cracked when she said their names. She said they wouldn't talk to her unless she could prove she had her life together. She said the courts wanted stability, a real job, a steady schedule, something respectable enough to convince a judge she wasn't a risk. That's when she asked, "Are you hiring?" Jasper was sitting next to me, arms crossed, jaw tight. I'd asked him to come because I didn't trust myself to hear her clearly. He didn't even wait for her to finish. No, he said, flat, immediate. He told her we couldn't afford risks right now, that 47 people depended on us, that bringing in someone unstable, even temporarily, could jeopardize everyone's livelihood. He wasn't cruel, he was factual, surgical. Cassidy started crying like someone had flipped a switch. She said she just needed one chance, that she'd changed, that she went to meetings, that she volunteered at a church on weekends, that my father would have helped her. That last part landed like a slap. She looked at me then, not like a niece, not like family, but like a door she was determined to force open. She said I was being cruel, that family helps family, that formal applications and interviews weren't how things worked when blood was involved. I suggested she apply properly, do an interview, background check, trial period, like anyone else. She scoffed. Your father wouldn't have done that. Jasper stood up. This conversation is over. I told her I'd think about it. I said it reflexively, like you say, I'll call you, when you already know you won't. I didn't think about it. I tried not to. But Cassidy didn't let the silence exist. She messaged me every other day for 2 weeks, photos of mold creeping up her walls, screenshots of job rejection emails, a picture of a custody hearing notice with the date circled in red, a paragraph explaining that if she could just show stable employment, she might get supervised visits with her younger son, the only one still willing to try. Each message chipped away at something I didn't realize was already cracked. The pressure came from everywhere. My mother warned me again. Kira texted once, "Don't do this." Murphy asked me gently if I was okay, if I was sure I wasn't letting guilt make decisions for me. And then one night, alone in my office, long after everyone else had gone home, I heard my father's voice in my head. Not the words he'd say, but the weight of them. The belief that people deserved a chance, that work could anchor someone when everything else fell apart. So I broke. I told Cassidy she could work as my personal assistant. Trial basis, temporary. One mistake and she was gone. She couldn't tell anyone in the family until she proved herself. She agreed too quickly, too eagerly. Jasper found out 3 days later when he walked past my office and saw her at my desk. He didn't say a word. He just turned around and walked out. That night, my phone didn't stop ringing. And every single person I loved asked the same question in a different way. What are you thinking? I told them all I had it under control. I was wrong. And the warning signs were already there. I just chose not to see them. For 6 weeks, Cassidy was fine. That was the most unsettling part. She showed up on time every morning, badge clipped neatly to her blouse. She filed documents without complaint, answered phones with a polite, almost overly careful voice, scheduled meetings exactly the way I asked. She brought her lunch in a brown paper bag and ate at her desk. No favors, no excuses, no drama. If you didn't know her history, you might have thought she was grateful. If you did know her history, you'd feel the quiet hum of unease beneath every interaction. Jasper barely spoke to me during that time unless it was about work. My mother asked fewer questions but watched everything more closely. Kira stopped texting entirely. Murphy didn't argue anymore. She just looked tired in a way that made me feel older than I was. Still, nothing happened. Until Wednesday. The call came at 1:47 a.m. I remember the exact second because the digital clock on my nightstand glowed red against the dark, like an accusation. Murphy stirred beside me as I reached for my phone, my heart already racing before the voice on the other end said a word. Ma'am, this is the security company for your office building. Cold spread through my chest. There's been a motion sensor triggered. Our patrol is on site. We found an individual inside the building. I sat up. Who? There was a pause. Not long, just long enough. Your employee, Cassidy. I was out of bed before the call ended. Hoodie, shoes, keys. Murphy asked what was wrong, and I couldn't form the sentence fast enough to explain. I just said, I need to go. I'll call you. The drive felt unreal. Empty streets. Traffic lights changing for no one. My breath fogging the windshield. Every mile I told myself there had to be an explanation, that this was a misunderstanding, that I hadn't been wrong about everything. Jasper got there before I did. Of course he did. Cassidy was sitting in the lobby when I arrived, hands folded in her lap, shoulders shaking with sobs. The security guard stood nearby, posture neutral, but eyes sharp. He looked like a man who had already decided where the truth lived. She says she left her phone in the office, he said. Cassidy looked up at me like a child caught lying. I just came back for it, I swear. The guard didn't react. Ma'am, our cameras show she's been inside the building for 40 minutes. My stomach dropped. We went to the security office. The room smelled like stale coffee and disinfectant. The guard pulled up the footage. 1:14 a.m., Cassidy unlocking the door with the copy of my key I'd given her for early mail deliveries. She didn't hesitate, didn't look around, walked straight to my office. The camera angle shifted. Cassidy opening desk drawers. Cassidy pulling files. Cassidy unlocking the locked cabinet, the one that held supplier contracts, pricing schedules, client lists, a cabinet only 3 people had keys to. At some point, she must have copied mine. Then came the part that made my hands go numb. She lifted her phone and photographed everything, slowly, methodically, page after page, like she was doing inventory. I couldn't breathe. Behind me, Jasper's voice was ice. Call the police. I shook my head, not because he was wrong, but because my mind was already racing ahead. Clients panicking, suppliers doubting us, the word security breach echoing through every conversation we'd have for months. Wait, I said, we need to think. He stared at me like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. You're still defending her. I'm thinking about the company. We confronted Cassidy in my office with the guard present. She didn't deny it. Not once. She said a competitor contacted her through Facebook, offered her $15,000 for pricing and client information. She said she needed the money for a custody lawyer. She said she was desperate. I knew it was wrong, she sobbed. I just didn't know what else to do. Jasper told her to get out. I told her she was fired, banned from the property, effective immediately. She asked if we were calling the police. Jasper said yes. I said no. She left without another word. That night we changed every lock, reset every code, had it combed through our systems, increased security patrols, Told key employees there had been a breach. No names, no details, just enough truth to prepare them. I went home as the sun was coming up. Murphy was sitting at the kitchen table waiting for me. She didn't ask what happened. She just looked at my face and knew. And that was the moment I realized something worse than betrayal had happened. I hadn't just been fooled. I had put everything my father built at risk. The shock didn't hit all at once. It came in waves. Quiet, suffocating ones that crashed into me when I least expected it. Standing in the shower with the water too hot, watching steam blur the mirror. Sitting at my desk, rereading emails I'd already answered. Driving home and realizing I didn't remember the last 3 traffic lights. I kept replaying the footage in my head. Cassidy's calm, the way she knew exactly where to go, how comfortable she looked opening a cabinet that had taken my father decades to fill with trust. The first thing I did was call my mother. She listened without interrupting. No gasps, no sharp intakes of breath, just silence on the line that felt heavier than yelling. When I finished, she said slowly, "Your father would have been ashamed of her." Then she paused, "And disappointed in you." It hurt more than I expected, not because I disagreed, but because she was right. I'd let my need to be kind override my responsibility to protect 47 families. Being good didn't mean being reckless. My father had known that. I'd forgotten it. Kira stopped speaking to me entirely after that. No angry messages, no lectures, just absence. Jasper spoke to me only in emails and meeting notes, his tone clipped and professional, like we were strangers forced into proximity. Murphy tried to understand. She said she saw why I wanted to help. She also said, gently, that I should have listened when everyone told me not to. She didn't say I told you so. She didn't need to. The worst conversation was with the employees. I gathered them in this break room. The air smelled like coffee and dust. I told them there had been an attempted theft of company information, that the person responsible had been fired, that we'd handled it. I didn't say it was family. I watched their faces as they processed it. Confusion, fear, calculation. People wondering if their jobs were safe, if I was competent enough to lead them. I saw my father in every expression. That night I didn't sleep, and then the lawsuit arrived. 3 weeks later, Monday morning, a thick folder dropped on my desk by Jasper without a word. Wrongful termination, discrimination, hostile work environment. Cassidy was suing us for $50,000, legal fees, and reinstatement. I read it twice. Then I called Tom, my father's lawyer for 20 years. 55, calm, precise. He said the case was garbage, that we had footage, documentation, payroll records, that we'd fire anyone for theft. But, he added, fighting this will cost money, time, publicity. That was the part that made my chest tighten, because fighting meant exposure. Admitting I gave a convicted family member access to sensitive files, clients asking questions, suppliers reconsidering contracts. Tom said we could settle quietly. $5,000, $10,000, make it disappear. Jasper said no immediately. My mother agreed. Kira called for the first time in months, just to say she'd never forgive me if I settled. Murphy saw both sides. She said fighting was morally right. Settling might be financially smart. I told Tom we'd fight. 2 days later, Cassidy started calling from different numbers, leaving voicemails saying she didn't want this, that her lawyer convinced her she had a case, that she'd drop everything if we just gave her $20,000. I saved every voicemail. Then she showed up at the office. Security escorted her out as she screamed through the glass that I destroyed her life. 12 employees saw it. I held an emergency meeting to reassure them. I saw doubt in their eyes. Afterward, Jasper pulled me aside. "This is what I warned you about," he said. "You let guilt override judgment. You're losing their confidence." I asked him how to fix it. He said, "You can't." That night, Murphy asked if he was right. I didn't know. I lay awake listening to Sky breathe in her sleep, wondering if my father had ever felt this exhausted, this unsure. And for the first time since taking over the company, I wondered if I was actually strong enough to hold it. Things didn't calm down after the lawsuit. They tightened, like a wire being pulled slowly, deliberately, until you can feel the vibration in your bones. 2 days after we filed our response, Cassidy's tone changed. The voicemails stopped sounding desperate and started sounding transactional. "I don't want to do this," she said in one message, her voice suddenly steady. "But my lawyer says I have leverage. $20,000 and I walk away. That's nothing to you. You'll make it back in a month." Nothing. I forwarded every voicemail to Tom. He listened once and said, "That's borderline extortion. Keep everything." Then she escalated again. She walked into the office during business hours like she still belonged there, demanded to see me, and started shouting when the receptionist refused. Security followed protocol. They escorted her out while she screamed that I'd destroyed her life, that my father would be ashamed of me, that I was going to pay for this. 12 employees watched. 12. Afterward, I stood in front of them with my palms flat on the conference table, explaining, again, that this was a legal matter, that their jobs were safe, that we had it under control. I could hear my voice, calm, measured. I could also see the doubt behind their eyes. That afternoon, Jasper told me he needed space. He started working from home 2 days a week. We were 30 feet apart when we were both in the building, but we only communicated through email. Every message felt like a performance review. I didn't know I was failing. Then the call came from someone I didn't expect. Cassidy's oldest son, Derek, 23. The same age I was when my father started teaching me how to read balance sheets. He sounded tired, not angry, just resigned. He said he heard about the lawsuit from his grandmother. He said he wanted me to know he and his brother wanted nothing to do with their mother, that she'd asked them for money for her lawyer, that she'd sent them copies of the lawsuit hoping guilt would work where manipulation hadn't. It didn't, he said quietly. He told me she'd promised to change their whole lives, over and over, that it always ended the same way. Burn everything down. Blame someone else. Play the victim. Fight it, he said. Don't feel guilty. She deserves the consequences. After I hung up, I sat alone in my office, staring at the wall until the building emptied. The fluorescent lights hummed like they were judging me. I thought about my father sitting in that same chair, making decisions no one would ever thank him for. And for the first time, something inside me hardened. I called Tom back and told him to go harder. File counterclaims. Make sure Cassidy understood that this wasn't a negotiation. That was when we learned the competitor had a name. Walsh Building Supply, our biggest rival, the company that had been circling our accounts for years. Discovery pulled Cassidy's phone records, multiple calls, texts, a number tied to Walsh's procurement manager, Frank, 51, a man my father fired 8 years ago for inflating expense reports. Tom didn't hesitate. He filed a separate lawsuit for industrial espionage. Everything exploded at once. Walsh claimed Frank acted alone. Frank claimed it was a misunderstanding. Cassidy's lawyer tried to withdraw from her case, citing irreconcilable differences. The judge denied it. Cassidy started calling family members again, apologies wrapped in manipulation. My mother hung up. Kira told her to lose her number. My grandmother told her my father had been right to distance himself. Then came the Facebook post. She didn't name us, but she didn't have to. She talked about rich family members turning their backs on her, giving her false hope, then destroying her for one mistake. The post was shared 47 times. 3 shares mattered. A contractor we'd worked with for years, a supplier rep, someone who sat on the Chamber of Commerce board with my father. The contractor called. He said he wanted our side. I gave it, carefully. He stayed, but his voice held doubt. The supplier rep didn't call. He just stopped responding. We lost $120,000 in annual business. The chamber sent a letter, ethics inquiry, 30 days to respond. Tom drafted a detailed response with evidence, footage, reports, timelines. The inquiry closed, but the damage lingered. Clients asked for additional security guarantees. One major account went under review. Jasper questioned every decision I made. My mother showed up unannounced and audited the books like she was searching for proof that I'd learned something. She closed the ledger and said, "The company is stable, but fragile, and that's on you." That night, Murphy found me sitting in my car in the parking lot long after everyone else had gone home. Sky had drawn a picture, stick figures holding hands, labeled Mommy, Mama, and Sky. "She asked if you still love us," Murphy said softly. I went home. I read Sky 3 stories. I watched her fall asleep holding my hand. And the next morning, Tom called with news that would change everything. Walsh wanted to settle. $1.2 million. Suddenly, this wasn't just about Cassidy anymore. It was about power, consequences, and whether doing the right thing could finally start to look like justice. It was quiet that night, but the kind of quiet that presses in from every angle. The settlement from Walsh had gone through. $1.2 million deposited straight into the company. Security upgraded. Employees given bonuses. Systems fortified. On paper, everything should have been fine. But it wasn't fine. I sat in my office after everyone had gone home, alone in the hum of fluorescent lights. The silence was heavy, and for the first time in months, I noticed how exhausted I really was. My body felt like a machine that had been run at full power without pause. Aches in places I hadn't known could ache, wrists sore from endless paperwork, eyes strained from staring at screens that never slept. I could hear the faint hum of traffic outside, the distant murmur of a city that had no idea what it had put me through. The nightmare didn't end with the settlement. Cassidy's lawsuit was dismissed, yes, but she wasn't gone. Every time I thought the worst was over, another message would appear. Another burner account, another claim, another accusation. Stalking, harassment, misleading emails to employees, Facebook posts accusing me of destroying her life. Every interaction, every intrusion chipped away at the fragile shell of stability I'd worked so hard to rebuild. I thought of my father, the man who had built this empire from nothing. He had trusted me, and I had tried to honor him, but had I been too naive, too generous, too blind to the consequences of wanting to be good in a world that had no patience for it? Even Jasper, my brother, had grown distant again. Our emails were clipped, sterile, stripped of the warmth and familiarity we once shared. Kira refused to speak. My mother's gentle scolding still echoed in my mind. Being good doesn't mean being stupid. Murphy, my rock, stayed close, but even she couldn't shield me from the hollow ache of realizing that one wrong decision could ripple through every corner of the life we had built. Sky, my little girl, had sensed it too. She asked why I looked tired, why I wasn't laughing at bedtime stories like I used to. I forced a smile and told her I was fixing something important, but inside I felt like I was fixing nothing at all. The weight of responsibility was suffocating. 47 employees depending on me, suppliers watching every move, clients questioning whether we could be trusted, and me, the one who had opened the door, who had chosen to bring Cassidy into the fold despite every warning, standing in the wreckage of my own judgment. I felt a pull toward despair, toward giving up entirely. It would be so easy to retreat, to let someone else handle it, to close the office, shut down the emails, hide in the quiet safety of home. But I couldn't, not now, not ever. My father's legacy, the livelihoods of dozens of people, and the integrity of a company built from sweat and years of careful work depended on me standing my ground, even if my body and heart screamed in protest. I sat at my desk, hands wrapped around a mug of cold coffee, staring at the empty office and letting the full scope of betrayal wash over me. Cassidy had taken what she could, manipulated the law, threatened family ties, and tried to turn empathy into weakness. And yet, I was the one left with the remnants, the exhaustion, the doubt, the crushing weight of responsibility. I had reached the bottom, emotionally, morally, physically. Every instinct told me I had failed. Every memory of Cassidy's calm, determined actions replayed like a loop I couldn't escape. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted someone, anyone, to tell me it wasn't my fault. But there was no one. There was only me, the hum of fluorescent lights, and the quiet, merciless tick of the clock. And in that darkness, I realized that this was exactly the moment that would define me. I could either let it break me, let it consume everything I had built, or I could take all of this, the exhaustion, the fear, the betrayal, and turn it into clarity, into resolve, into power. But at that moment, sitting alone in the office, I wasn't ready to stand. I could only feel the weight of how far I had fallen and how alone I truly was. It started with the evidence. Not the videos, not the emails, not even the voicemails, though all of those were crucial, but something I hadn't fully processed until that morning, the pattern. Cassidy hadn't acted alone. Every misstep, every manipulation, every frantic message pointed to the same truth. She was being directed, guided, and enabled by someone outside. Walsh Building Supply. They had reached into our company through her, and she had been nothing more than a pawn. When Tom laid it out for me, I felt the first spark of clarity since the midnight call. Walsh's procurement manager, Frank, was the missing link. The calls, the messages, the sudden appearance of opportunities to help Cassidy, it all fit. And if we could prove that connection, everything Cassidy claimed would collapse. Her lawsuit, her narrative of victimhood, her manipulation. I remember the moment I realized this wasn't just about me trying to be kind. It wasn't about guilt. It wasn't about defending my father's legacy from a family member's betrayal. It was about truth, integrity, and survival. And for the first time in months, I felt a sense of control. Then came Derek's voice again. Cassidy's son, 23, firm, resolute. He told me what I already suspected but needed to hear. His mother had made her choices. She had burned bridges, exploited relationships, and now she was facing the consequences. He wasn't angry at me. He understood what had happened, and he encouraged me to proceed without guilt. It was a jolt. Hearing the perspective of someone who had grown up under Cassidy's manipulation, who could see her objectively, gave me the clarity I had lacked. It wasn't vengeance I needed, it was resolution. And the path to that resolution was clear. We had to fight, relentlessly, without hesitation. I called Tom immediately. Go harder, I said. File counterclaims. Make sure they understand she didn't act in isolation. Show them everything, the calls, the messages, the evidence connecting Walsh. Make this airtight. My voice was steady, but my chest still ached from months of tension. For the first time, though, the weight didn't feel paralyzing. It felt actionable. We began preparing for court. Tom organized every piece of evidence, tracing Cassidy's actions back to Walsh. We had footage, timestamps, emails, phone records, everything meticulously documented. We outlined each point in a way that left no room for interpretation. Every misstep Cassidy had made, every attempt to manipulate her family or the law would be exposed, and beyond that, Walsh's complicity would be undeniable. I remember sitting at my desk, Skye asleep in the next room, Murphy leaning against the doorframe quietly. For once, there was no panic, no doubt, no overwhelming sense of guilt, just a quiet, controlled focus. I felt like I was finally stepping into the person my father had trained me to be, the one who could make the hard decisions, who could protect the company, the employees, and the legacy he had built. By the time the trial date was set, I wasn't just defending a business. I was reclaiming my agency. I was showing myself, and everyone watching, that being kind and compassionate didn't mean being naive, that mistakes could be corrected, lessons could be learned, and that sometimes strength came from understanding the limits of forgiveness. It wasn't just a legal turning point, it was personal, emotional, a quiet declaration to myself that I was capable, even in the aftermath of betrayal, exhaustion, and fear. I wasn't powerless anymore. I had the evidence, I had the strategy, and I had the resolve to see it through. That day, for the first time since Cassidy walked back into my life, I felt hope. Not naive hope, not fragile hope, controlled, deliberate hope. The kind that comes from knowing the truth, having the facts, and preparing to act decisively. And in that moment, I knew the battle wasn't just about justice. It was about proving to myself that I could rise from the chaos and reclaim everything that mattered. The court ruling didn't just end Cassidy's case. It dismantled the carefully constructed world she had tried to manipulate. Her lawsuit was thrown out. The judge ruled that she had been fired for cause with clear documentation, evidence of theft, and multiple witnesses. Her claims of discrimination and wrongful termination were deemed frivolous. Every attempt she had made to cast herself as a victim crumbled under the weight of fact. But the fallout went deeper than the courtroom. Her sons, Derek and his younger brother, made it clear they wanted no contact with her. They had grown up watching patterns of blame, deception, and broken promises, and they refused to allow history to repeat itself. The woman who had tried to turn the law and the people around her into shields now stood alone. Walsh Building Supply, exposed through the counterclaims and evidence, scrambled to contain the damage. Their procurement manager, Frank, who had tried to orchestrate industrial espionage, was called to testify. The evidence showed unequivocally that he had recruited Cassidy to steal our trade secrets. Walsh scrambled, claiming ignorance, but the record was clear. The network of deceit unraveled, leaving the company scrambling to defend its reputation. Internally, our own company shifted. Employees who had doubted me, who had whispered behind cubicle walls, who had questioned my judgment, now looked to me with a renewed sense of trust. They saw the evidence, the legal victories, and the decisive action taken to protect both the company and its people. The tension in the warehouse eased. Conversations carried less fear, more confidence. The people who had been on edge for months could finally breathe. Jasper and I slowly began to reconnect. Months of distance, of sterile emails, of awkward silences gave way to collaboration. We weren't just siblings sharing a business, we were co-guardians of a legacy. Trust, once fragile, was being rebuilt. Murphy and Sky noticed the difference too. Dinner became a shared ritual again. Sky asked questions without fear, laughed freely at the table, drew pictures of the family with hope rather than longing. The little signs, the subtle weight lifted from shoulders, the absence of constant worry, were proof that stability could return. Cassidy, meanwhile, faced her consequences. Ordered to pay legal fees she couldn't afford, with a felony record and a decade-long restraining order, she was left to navigate life with no bridges to burn or people to rely on. Her sons wanted nothing to do with her. Her mother and siblings wanted nothing to do with her. She had become a cautionary tale not of redemption, but of what happens when repeated choices betray trust and integrity. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I felt relief. Relief that the chaos had ended. Relief that the people who depended on me were safe. Relief that the company my father built could continue. And most of all, I felt a quiet, resolute understanding. Being kind doesn't mean being naive. Being forgiving doesn't mean ignoring reality. And protecting those who matter sometimes requires making the hard, uncomfortable, and morally complex choices. As I walked through the warehouse one evening, watching employees move confidently through their tasks, Murphy by my side, Sky skipping ahead, I realized that while the past would always be part of me, it no longer dictated my every choice. I had reclaimed control, not through vengeance, but through steadfastness, clarity, and the courage to stand firm when everything felt like it was falling apart. The company was safe. The family, in its own way, was safe. And I, for the first time in a long while, felt like I was enough. Months later, as I stood at the edge of the warehouse, watching the last delivery trucks roll out under the evening sky, I realized something fundamental. Life doesn't hand you neat resolutions. It doesn't tie up betrayal, grief, and responsibility in tidy bows. But it does give you choices: how to respond, how to rebuild, how to define yourself amid the chaos. Cassidy had made her choices. She had burned bridges, manipulated trust, and left a trail of consequences that she alone would carry. Walsh had tried to exploit weakness. My father had left me a legacy I barely felt ready to shoulder, and yet here I was, still standing, still accountable, still determined to honor the work and values my family had built. I had learned the hard way that kindness and trust must be paired with vigilance. That empathy is not a weakness, but neither is it permission to let others take advantage. That protecting what matters often requires firm boundaries, careful planning, and the courage to confront uncomfortable truths. Sky ran up, her backpack bouncing, a bright drawing clutched in her hand. "Look, Mommy, this is our family," she exclaimed. Crayon figures, smiling faces, a rainbow stretched across the top. For a moment, I let myself just breathe. Not as the head of a company, not as a daughter bearing the weight of history, but as a mother witnessing life continue, full of hope and color. Murphy put an arm around me. "You look lighter," she said softly, "like the weight's finally off your shoulders." I smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because I had finally found balance. The chaos, the betrayal, the sleepless nights, they had shaped me, but they no longer defined me. I could move forward without guilt, without fear, and without letting the past dictate my present. And perhaps the deepest lesson of all, integrity matters. Standing firm for what is right, protecting those who depend on you, and facing betrayal with clarity rather than panic. Those choices don't just preserve what you have, they define who you are. I still think of my father every day. I still wonder if I did enough, if I made him proud. But I also know this: I survived, I learned, and I am stronger for it. Cassidy's shadow may linger in memory, but it no longer controls me. I am the steward of my own life, the guardian of my family, and the architect of my own resilience. And that, more than money, more than lawsuits, more than fear, is the legacy I will carry forward.